Welcome to the deep dive. We are talking directly to you today.
Yeah, specifically to you.
You, the parent, who might literally be tossing and turning at night, staring at the ceiling, just worrying about the current state of education.
It is a really common anxiety right now.
Oh, absolutely. You're probably looking at your kids' homework, looking at their grades,
Uh,
and asking yourself, is my child actually learning anything, or are they just being pushed along this conveyor belt through a broken system?
Right, the educational conveyor belt.
Exactly. And if that midnight anxiety sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we have a massive, highly provocative stack of source material to get through.
It is definitely provocative.
We are looking at excerpts from a book called Estimulando Intelligencia, which translates to Stimulating Intelligence. It was written by Professor Pierluigi Piazzi.
Widely known as Professor Pierre.
Right. And he was an incredibly influential educator who taught around, get this, 100,000 students in Brazil over his decades-long career.
That number alone is worth pausing on. 100,000 students.
It's hard to even picture that many kids.
I mean, when you spend your life in front of that many different minds, you build an enormous sample size to draw conclusions from.
Yeah, you see what works and what really doesn't.
Exactly. And his conclusions in this book are not sugar-coated at all. He essentially wrote a brutally honest, no-excuses instruction manual for the human brain.
Specifically aimed at parents, right?
Yes, aimed at parents who feel completely helpless. Professor Pierre's central thesis is that the modern education system is fundamentally failing our kids.
Which is exactly what parents are worried about at 2 in the morning.
Right.
What?
But rather than just complaining about it, he outlines the exact and honestly sometimes uncomfortable steps that parents need to take at home to rescue their children's intellectual development.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with what the author calls the first undeniable symptom of a sick educational system.
The cram schools.
Yeah, he points to the very existence of what are known in Brazil as cursinhas.
You're right, casinos.
For context, these are essentially intensive cram schools or university prep courses. Kids spend years in regular school, and then right before the massive university entrance exams, they enroll in these expensive, high-pressure cram schools to actually learn what they were supposed to be learning all along.
Which he argues is a massive red flag.
Right. Professor Pierre argues that in a functional, healthy society, these institutions shouldn't even exist.
The analogy he uses in the text is really striking, actually. He compares these cram schools to an intensive care unit, an ICU, in a hospital.
Oh, wow. An educational ICU.
Yeah, think about it. A healthy hospital doesn't have 90% of its patients on life support.
That would mean the doctors are doing something terribly wrong.
Exactly. But in education, he says, the students ending up in these cram schools are essentially the victims of widespread educational malpractice committed by regular schools.
Malpractice. That is a strong word.
It is. They are arriving at the end of their high school careers intellectually flatlining. If regular schools were doing their jobs properly on a daily basis, there would be no need for a multi-million-dollar educational ICU industry to resuscitate these kids' knowledge at the 11th hour.
And he is very specific about what is causing this malpractice.
He is. He names names.
He points the finger directly at a pedagogical theory called constructivism. Now, for our listeners who aren't teachers or, haven't taken an education psychology class, let's break that down. What exactly is constructivism in practice?
Broadly speaking, constructivism is a theory of learning associated with figures like Jean Piaget, Lev Vygotsky, and Paulo Freire.
The heavy hitters of education theory.
Right. The core idea is that children shouldn't just be empty vessels having facts poured into them by a lecturing teacher.
Instead, they construct it themselves.
Exactly. Kids should actively construct their own knowledge through experiences, social interactions, and guided discovery. So rather than a teacher at the chalkboard explaining how long division works step by step,
Like the old school way.
yeah, exactly. A constructivist approach might involve putting kids in groups with blocks and having them discover the concept of division organically.
Got it. Which, on paper and in highly controlled environments, sounds like a beautiful, empowering way to learn.
It sounds wonderful in theory.
But Professor Pierre's perspective is that this approach has become a complete disaster in the real world. He views it as a failed paradigm.
A completely failed paradigm, in his words.
Right. That has directly resulted in an entire generation of students lacking fundamental skills in basic reading, writing, and math. If it sounds so good on paper, why does he argue it fails so spectacularly in practice?
Because of the disconnect between theory and reality. Professor Peer takes a very hardline stance against the people making these rules.
The bureaucrats.
Yeah, he provocatively refers to the educational bureaucrats dictating these policies as pedagogrecas, or sometimes he uses the mocking term tias maricotas, which translates loosely to out-of-touch, fussing aunties.
Dies Maricotis, I love that. But it's a serious critique.
It is. His argument is that these bureaucrats are sitting in quiet, air-conditioned offices, reading academic papers and writing dissertations about utopian learning environments.
Far away from actual children.
Exactly. They mandate these constructivist rules for public schools, yet many of them haven't held a piece of chalk or tried to manage a loud, chaotic classroom of 40 tired children in years, if ever.
And he makes a really compelling point about how this actually worsens social inequality, which is ironic because the bureaucrats often champion these methods in the name of leveling the playing field.
Yeah, the irony is not lost on him.
The book notes that private schools, which answer to paying parents who demand results on exams, looked at the constructivist approach, realized their students weren't actually learning the core material, and largely abandoned it.
They dropped it quickly.
Right. They reverted to more structured, traditional teacher-led instruction. Meanwhile, public schools, which are heavily regulated by government mandates, are forced to keep using this experimental paradigm.
So the gap just gets worse.
Exactly. The educational gap between the wealthy kids in private schools and the poorer kids in public schools just widens.
What's fascinating here is that despite diagnosing this massive systemic failure, Professor Peer doesn't just let parents off the hook by saying, well, the schools are broken, what can you do?
He doesn't give you a free pass at all.
Actually, he does the exact opposite. He places a massive, and probably for some, a very uncomfortable amount of responsibility right back on the family.
Right on your shoulders, the parent listening to this.
If the system is broken, the home has to become the fortress. He insists that modern parents are making a grave mistake by trying to completely outsource raising their kids to the school system.
The drive-through parenting model.
Drive-through parenting, yes.
You drop the kid off at 8 in the morning,
Sure.
and you expect to pick up a fully formed, polite, disciplined, educated young adult at 3 in the afternoon. But the author draws a very sharp line in the sand between being an instructor and being an educator.
Yes, and he uses a detail from his own childhood to illustrate this perfectly. He attended primary school in Italy.
Right.
He points out that in the Italian government, there is no Ministry of Education. There is a Ministry of Instruction.
Ministry of Instruction, that's a huge distinction.
It changes everything. The adults standing at the front of the classroom are instructors. Their specific job is to instruct your child in mathematics, geography, biology, and literature.
And the parents.
The parents, on the other hand, are the educators. The formation of a child's character, their manners, their moral compass, and their discipline. That is entirely the family's job.
So when parents expect instructors to act as educators, the whole ecosystem collapses.
It falls apart completely.
And according to the book, you can see that collapse, plain as day, in modern classroom behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
He paints this vivid, chaotic picture of students treating classrooms like a cocktail party. Kids are chatting in groups, passing notes, looking at their phones, totally ignoring the adult at the front of the room who is desperately trying to project their voice over the din.
Just utter disrespect.
Professor Peer argues that you cannot expect even the most brilliant instructor to deliver a good lesson to a room full of people who were never taught basic respect and impulse control at home.
Which brings us to one of his most controversial assertions. Because of this lack of baseline discipline, he has a very specific view on the modern explosion of learning disorder diagnoses.
Specifically ADHD. Right. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Yes.
Wait, so he's basically saying the modern ADHD epidemic is just fake. Isn't that a massive oversimplification of a real medical issue?
It is a bold claim, and to be fair to the text, Professor Peer does explicitly acknowledge that true biological neurological conditions exist and that those children need proper medical and psychological support.
Okay, so he's not totally dismissing it.
No, not entirely. However, his argument is that the sheer volume of kids currently being medicated for ADHD is a statistical impossibility.
There are just too many of them.
Right. He believes a massive percentage of these children don't have a chemical imbalance in their brains, they have a lifestyle imbalance.
A lifestyle imbalance. Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they are victims of a totally disorganized life. They have zero limits, no predictable schedules, and most critically severe, unchecked screen addiction.
Yeah, the section on screen addiction is intense. It's not just a casual warning about too much TV. He equates it to chemical dependency.
He takes it very seriously.
To prove his point, the book cites an extreme example from a university study where young adults volunteered to go entirely without screens. No laptops, no cell phones, no tablets, for just 3 days.
Just 3 days.
And the results read like something out of a rehab clinic. These students actually suffered physical withdrawal symptoms. We're talking fevers, vomiting, and even convulsions.
From just having their funds taken away?
Professor Pier's takeaway is that we are willingly handing our kids a highly addictive drug, placing it right in their pockets and calling it an educational tool.
Because he views the threat as so severe, his prescription for parents is incredibly strict.
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Right. He demands that parents reestablish clear authority in the home. And he is careful to distinguish between authority and authoritarianism.
You can still be loving.
Yes, you can be a deeply loving parent, you can have open dialogues, you can be warm, but at the end of the day, the child needs to know who is driving the bus.
The parents are driving.
His specific, non-negotiable rules include completely removing televisions and computers from the child's bedroom.
That's a big one.
And when it comes to phones, he says if a child truly needs a phone for safety or logistics, you give them a dumb phone.
Like a flip phone.
A basic device that makes calls and sends texts, but absolutely does not have an internet browser or social media apps.
I can hear parents listening to this right now groaning.
Oh, I'm sure.
It is so easy for an author to write "take away the screens," but the reality of modern parenting is exhausting. For a parent working 2 jobs, sometimes that tablet is the only babysitter available so you can just cook dinner in peace. It's a huge ask.
It is a massive shift in how a household operates.
But the author's argument is that the short-term pain and tantrum of enforcing these boundaries prevents a long-term intellectual disaster. Exactly. So what does this all mean? It means that before a kid can even begin to absorb academic material, the home environment has to be rigidly protected from digital distraction.
Discipline has to be established first.
Only then can we actually look at the mechanics of studying. And this is where Professor Pierre introduces what I think is the biggest paradigm shift in the entire book.
The part about studying for tests.
Yes. He states flat out that studying for a test is one of the most pernicious, damaging mistakes a student can make.
Which goes against everything most of us were taught. We grew up believing that if you have a history test on Friday, you sit down on Thursday night, cram all the dates and names into your head, and if you get an A on Friday, congratulations, you learn the material.
Professor Pierre says absolutely not.
Getting a good grade after cramming does not mean you learned anything.
To understand why, we have to move away from pedagogy and look directly at the neuroscience of how the human brain processes information.
Yeah, the biology behind this is fascinating.
The author makes a crucial distinction. Understanding and learning are 2 completely different neurological processes.
They are not the same thing at all.
When a student is sitting in class, paying attention to a brilliant instructor explaining a concept, they are merely understanding. The information is entering their short-term memory.
He uses a great analogy for this in the book.
The sand analogy, right?
Yes. Understanding something in class is like writing lightly in the sand at the beach. It's there, you can read it, but the very first wave of distraction,
A text message, the bus ride home.
or just the passage of a few hours, that wave will wash the information away entirely.
So how do we stop the wave?
To move that information from short-term memory into long-term memory, specifically to have it consolidated into the cerebral cortex, a biological mechanism has to be triggered.
And what triggers it?
That mechanism requires 2 things: active, solitary effort, and sleep.
Sleep.
Which brings us to the author's absolute golden rule, his famous mantra for students, alla data, alla studata, HOJE.
Which translates to lesson taught, lesson studied today.
Today, not tomorrow, not Sunday night, today.
Right. To actually learn, a student must study the material on the exact same day it was taught before they go to sleep.
Because sleep is the biological process the brain uses to consolidate memory. It takes those light scratches in the sand and carves them into permanent stone.
As you sleep, your brain is basically doing the sorting.
Yes, it decides what to keep and what to throw away. If you actively review the material before bed, you signal to your brain, hey, this is important, keep this.
But if you wait
until the weekend to study what was taught on Monday, you've already slept 4 times. The sand has been washed completely smooth, you aren't reviewing, you are starting from scratch.
This totally redefines the concept of homework. Homework isn't a punishment or busy work. It is the literal act of learning.
And he has highly specific advice on how this studying must happen. He says studying has to be an active, solitary act.
Meaning no study groups?
You cannot study in a group. If you are in a group, you are socializing, you might be collaborating, but you are not engaging the deep neural pathways required for long-term retention.
And he is incredibly critical of passive studying techniques. Just staring at a book doesn't work.
Oh, I feel personally attacked by his section on passive studying.
The highlighters.
Specifically, the yellow highlighter anecdote. I used to do exactly this. I would sit on my bed, put some music on, read a textbook, and highlight sentences in neon yellow.
Maybe you were absorbing it all.
I would color my textbooks until they literally glowed in the dark, thinking I was a genius who was absorbing everything.
And Professor Pierre would say your parents probably walked by your room, saw the highlighter, and thought, oh, look how hard they are studying.
But he insists that highlighting is entirely passive. It does not engage the brain enough to form permanent memories.
It's just coloring.
All it does is make a child highly skilled at the physical act of drawing straight yellow lines. It creates the illusion of studying without any of the cognitive heavy lifting.
True studying, according to the text, requires friction. It requires a pencil in hand writing on a piece of paper.
You have to actually struggle with it a bit.
You have to actively engage with the material, summarize it in your own words, and solve the math problems yourself without looking at the answer key.
The physical act of writing on paper activates completely different neural pathways than typing on a keyboard or swiping on a screen.
He is adamant about that. iPads and laptops cannot substitute for physical books and paper notebooks when it comes to this deep, solitary learning.
Absolutely not.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because all of this hard work, the daily discipline, the solitary studying, the pencil on paper, it all builds toward the most empowering concept in the book.
The malleability of human intelligence.
Yes, the author firmly rejects the myth of fixed intelligence.
This might be the most crucial takeaway for any parent listening. We have this cultural tendency to treat intelligence like a genetic lottery.
Like you're just born smart or you aren't.
You either have a high IQ or you don't, in the same way you have blue eyes, or you're tall, or you have a family history of allergies. But Professor Pierre asserts that intelligence is highly malleable.
It's more like a muscle.
Exactly. It is much more like a muscle. It can be stretched, grown, and developed significantly through environmental stimulus.
To back this up, the text mentions a fascinating study from France involving the zodiac.
Right.
Now, to be clear, the author is not saying astrology is real, but researchers looked at thousands of people and found a strange statistical anomaly. People born under winter signs like Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces statistically had slightly higher IQs than people born under summer signs.
And when the researchers dug into why this would be, the answer had absolutely nothing to do with the alignment of the stars.
It was all about the environment.
Because these babies were born in the dead of winter in Europe, their parents were essentially trapped indoors with them. They couldn't go out to parks, they couldn't socialize as much.
So they were forced to focus on the baby.
Consequently, those parents spent significantly more time indoors, directly talking to, playing with, and interacting with their infants during those crucial early months of brain development.
That extra attention literally grew their brains.
This increased environmental stimulus resulted in a statistically measurable increase in intelligence compared to summer babies, whose parents were out and about pushing strollers and socializing with other adults.
It proves that the environment you create matters more than innate genetics.
Without a doubt.
So, if intelligence is a muscle that can be grown through environment, how do we actively stretch it as kids get older?
The author describes an ideal learning environment using a specific psychological graph.
Imagine a graph where the vertical axis is the level of challenge, and the horizontal axis is the student's current intelligence or skill level.
The goal for a parent or a teacher is to keep the student perfectly balanced in what we might call a zone of growth.
Right in the middle.
On this graph, that zone hovers right in the middle between two dangerous extremes. If the challenge is too low and the work is too easy, the student falls into the bottom right corner, boredom.
Or what the author calls pitio.
Tadio, exactly. If the challenge is way too high and the student doesn't have the skills yet, they fall into the top left corner. Panic or anxiety, ansiedad.
So you have to hit the sweet spot.
By constantly pushing the student just slightly past their current comfort zone, giving them a challenge that is frustrating but achievable, the child's intelligence literally moves up and to the right on the graph.
They actually get smarter.
They do. The book refers to this as the Mahaly challenge, which is a nod to the famous psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
The guy who pioneered the concept of the flow state.
That's the one.
But keeping a kid in that flow state requires parents to be comfortable watching their child struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
And Professor Pierre warns parents about two massive, well-intentioned pitfalls here.
The first one is so common.
The danger of the poor thing label. He says never ever label your child as having learning difficulties or call them a coitadinho,
A poor little thing.
just because they are struggling with a subject.
The reasoning here is deeply psychological. Kids are incredibly perceptive.
They absorb everything we say about them.
If a child hears the adults in their life making excuses for them, calling them a poor thing who just isn't a math person, the child will unconsciously adopt that victim mentality.
They internalize it.
They will internalize the belief that their brain is just fundamentally broken in that area, and they will simply stop trying. They drop out of that zone of growth entirely because the adults gave them permission to quit.
The second pitfall is on the opposite end of the spectrum, for the parents of the so-called smart kids.
This one is tricky.
He says if your child is coming home with effortless straight A's, you shouldn't be posting their report card on the fridge and bragging about it. You should actually be worried.
Very worried.
If the grades are effortless, it means the child is not being challenged. They are bored, hovering in that TDO zone on the graph, and their intellectual growth has completely stalled.
They might be coasting through the system, but their intelligence muscle is actively atrophying.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Professor Pierre is making a profound argument about what really matters to a society.
Right.
He states that the greatest natural resource of any nation isn't its oil reserves, its minerals, or its agriculture.
it's the kids.
The greatest resource is the intelligence of its youth. And that intelligence isn't mined from the ground, it is cultivated daily.
In the home.
It's built through active parental involvement, through setting strict boundaries around technology, and through solitary, challenging daily study habits.
Let's do a quick recap of everything we've covered today, because there's a lot for a worried parent to digest here.
It's a heavy manual.
We've decoded Professor Pierre's manual, and the core takeaways are unambiguous. Schools are strictly for instruction, but your home is for education and character building.
True studying is not cramming for a test on Thursday night.
It is an active process, done alone, with a pencil, on the very same day the lesson is taught.
Technology and screens must be aggressively managed to protect a child's attention span and brain chemistry.
And finally, intelligence is not fixed at birth. It is a muscle that must be constantly challenged with friction to grow.
It is a heavy load to place on a parent. Professor Pierre's tone throughout the book is uncompromising, and his views on things like constructivism and ADHD diagnoses are certainly polarizing.
Yeah, it's not an easy pill to swallow.
It is incredibly hard to be the bad guy who takes away the smartphone or forces a tired kid to sit down with a pencil after a long day.
But beneath the gruff exterior and the blunt criticisms of the educational system, his core message is actually deeply hopeful.
It really is.
He is telling you that you are not helpless. You do not have to wait for bureaucrats to fix a broken school system. You have the ultimate power to shape and rescue your child's mind simply by changing the rules and the environment inside your own house.
He is handing the control panel right back to you.
And that brings us to a final, provocative thought from the text to leave you with today. The author mentions a memory from his own childhood, a simple quote he once heard on the radio that stuck with him forever. Happiness is not a station, it is the train itself.
It's a beautiful metaphor to end on.
Yeah, it is.
If intelligence, much like happiness, is the journey and not the destination, if it's found in the daily act of studying, the daily friction of a challenge, the daily enforcement of discipline, then we have to ask ourselves a hard question as parents.
What's the question?
Look at the routines and the rules you've set up in your own home right now. Are those rules building a high-speed rail for your child's mind to travel on? Or are you just sitting next to them in the waiting room at the station hoping the school will eventually show up and do the driving for you?